All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Alyssa Karpenka, and I am the event coordinator for McNally Robinson Booksellers in Saskatoon. Tonight's event is coming to you from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis nations. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the launch of Carrying It Forward, Essays from Kistahpinanihk by John Brady McDonald. Thank you to John for being here tonight. And I'd also like to thank Wolsak and Wynn Publishers, and especially Tanya and Noel for working with us to create this event. I'd also like to welcome our very special guest host for the evening, Mika Lafond. Mika is a Nehia Iskweo from Muskeg Lake Cree Nation. She resides in Treaty 6 territory. She is a mother, educator, and author. She completed her MFA at the University of Saskatchewan and published a bilingual poetry book. Her passion for Indigenous education has led her to pursue language revitalization, nation building, and land-based education. She is currently instructing ITEP classes and is a director of the Ionisawin Story Institute Incorporated. Our guest of honor this evening is, of course, John Brady McDonald. John is an Nehiyawak Métis writer, artist, historian, musician, playwright, actor, and activist, born and raised in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. He is from the Muskeg Lake Cree Nation of the Mistawasis Nehiyawak. He is an author whose work has been published and presented around the globe, and an acclaimed speaker who has presented in venues such as the Anspoke Aboriginal Literature Festival, the Black Hills Seminars on Reclaiming Youth, the Appalachian Mountain Seminars, the Edmonton and Fort McMurray Literary Festivals, the Eden Mills Writers Festival, and the Ottawa International Writers Festival. He resides in Northern Saskatchewan. We will now hear from John. Please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you very much. Very honored to be here. When I first started writing and seeing my words on a piece of paper in a book, it was kind of one of the benchmarks I set myself was to have a book launch at McNally Robinson. So, this is one of the things I can check off my box. Before I get started, I would like to greet you in my language. That's it. Yeah, Mr. ko kadu. Nihoche. Mistawasis, nihiwa giwa. Muskeg sigay gana. Yegwa, Kistahpinanihk. Ninote. Nyatsimun. Hello. My name in Cree translates into English as Coyote He is Starving. As mentioned, I'm from the Mistawasis Nehiyawak. I'm from the Muskeg Lake Cree Nation, as sister number 2, and as my daughter. I'm very happy to have my daughter here. I'm also from Kistahpinanihk. Kistahpinanihk is the area that my ancestors were on for thousands of years. It's the area on which the city of Prince Albert currently sits. And I want to share a little bit of that story. This book is my first nonfiction book. I'm traditionally a spoken word artist and a poet. And so for me to write in a non-poetry style it's unique and it was exciting. I'm very honored and happy that I was able to do that. This book has been a long time coming for me. It's another culmination of a dream I've had for a very long time. I'm going to read the chapter, My Regalia. It talks a little bit about my journey on what we call the Red Road, the traditional journey that is Indigenous people who follow traditional cultural practices and ceremonies embark upon. My regalia is old. It is not the fancy, flashy regalia of today. My regalia is made from what I've gathered over 25 years. It is made of black and white scraps of cloth without beads or sequins. The scraps of cloth came from a bag of material I found tucked in the back of a storage room at a youth center where I worked for many years. I wear a plastic beaded breastplate I made when I was an 18-year-old student and beginning my return to the Red Road. The beads come from a pile of discarded projects left behind and unfinished by other students, dream catchers and chokers and keychains. And I had to meticulously undo someone else's abandoned work to create one of my own. The effort and energy that they partially put into their work goes with me when I dance. My fringes are but ribbons from a bag of athletic medals I got at a secondhand store. All strips of red, white, and blue ribbons sewn as a fringe for my breechclout and gauntlets. Chosen to represent my journeys into the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia, the national flags of those colors, land upon which I had partaken in ceremony. Underneath it all, I wear a pair of old black sweatpants and a dress shirt, a nod to my rebellious youth, my tribute to Johnny Cash, and the metalhead I once was and still am. I have no bustle or moccasins. My headdress is made from crow, goose, and hawk feathers, zip-tied and held onto an old ball cap with sinew and electrical tape. The hawk feathers came from a bird I saw hit by a vehicle in front of me on a dusty rural road one summer. I stopped and picked up the bird, and it died in my hands. I felt its life force dissipate, and I honored the bird by making sure that its feathers would feel the wind again. My shield looks like overcooked and dried out bannock. The moose hide shield was a gift from a young offender who had once counseled on the outside. Though the shield is small and misshapen, darkened and warped, he took great pride in his creation, and for the first time, followed the proper channels to make sure I got it. The choker I wear around my neck was made by a young lady in foster care, who made it for me as a gift for reasons known only to herself. She was in a group home, and shortly after she made the choker for me, she left the group home, and I have not seen her since. The only decoration I have on any of it is a single black handprint. This design was given to me by a Lakota elder many years ago in the Black Hills of South Dakota. The handprint is a powerful symbol, and the teachings and reasons I was gifted as my mark will forever remain between me and that elder. While my role is to educate and to teach, there will forever be things that will remain private, secret. There are many teachings and ceremonies that are not for public consumption. They are sacred rites and teachings held in private reserve, pardon the pun, for those following the traditional ways of their people. They are held private and sacred for many reasons. Remember that for decades, many traditional practices, teachings, and ceremonies were outlawed across much of North America. And the residential schools tried their best to beat the culture out of us. Our traditional and spiritual ways have been under attack since the first Christian cross was brought ashore centuries ago, and it is completely understandable that some of our teachings were not meant to be shared with others. They watched and heard the stories of sacred big drums, eagle feathers, medicine bundles, and sweat lodges being burned in bonfires. They had their mouths slapped while speaking their language. They were eyewitnesses to the destruction. Our elders and ancestors took our ways underground, hid them, protected them against destruction. Sacred songs were sung while keeping the beat with the bass drum from a marching band or drum kit. regalia made from rags, yarn, flour sacks, and what have you. The ways continued in spite of the destruction. And part of that was due to the fact that they were protective of them. Compared to other powwow dancers, I look ragged and poor, which is true on both counts. And I'm never going to win any competitions or prizes. That's not why I dance, however. I dance to heal and to connect with who I am as an Indigenous warrior. I dance because the big drum speaks to me. The ways in which we express ourselves in our culture, be it through dance, through singing, through visual art, through teaching, however one chooses to express themselves, are always Muskeg for medicine. It is how we heal, and the actions and the intent of the person teaching, the practitioner of the medicine, often dictate the lesson we learn from the medicine. The first time that I ever sat down at the big drum was in grade 10. I was invited by Victor Thunderchild, my high school Cree teacher. This was the teacher who first helped me set my steps onto the red road. He was the first to welcome me to the big drum, to offer me a drumstick and to add my beat to the song. I was a scrawny, scruffy teenager from the bad side of town with long, messy hair, a black leather jacket, and a bad attitude. And Victor gave me the chance to reconnect with that part of me. On April 17th, 2021, Victor Thunderchild tragically lost his life as a result of COVID-19. He was only 55 years old. His death, the first death of a teacher in the province of Saskatchewan as a result of COVID-19, absolutely gutted and devastated the community. To say that he was a beloved teacher would be an understatement. Victor touched so many lives, and he was truly loved by those of us who knew him, who learned from him, who shared the drum with him, and who crossed his path. When I was a student at the Wolsak Cultural School, I was honored to sing alongside my fellow students. I was always the lightest skinned singer at the drum, but I was never made to feel that I did not belong at that drum. And I knew that I was part of this cultural heritage and way of life that dates back far into the past. I remember the first time the lead singer gestured towards me across the drum, telling me in that unspoken way, "Okay, it's your turn to sing lead on this one." I was so nervous. I think I did okay. In time, I was given the honor of being a drum keeper, given a few songs, and told to share them with the young people. When I was a younger artist, I painted a lot of stereotypical Indigenous paintings. Eagles and teepees and buffalo skulls and the like. Whenever I saw teepees, be it at a powwow or any other gathering, I always noticed a long red ribbon flying from one of the poles. And as such, whenever I painted a teepee, I dutifully painted a long red ribbon flying from one of the poles. I always wondered about the symbolism of that long red ribbon. I never knew what spiritual or ceremonial meanings it held. I never questioned it, though I wanted to know very badly. I finally decided to discover, after so many years, what that ribbon meant. At a ceremony, I approached an elder and I presented him with tobacco. "Mushum," I asked, "what is the meaning of that red ribbon on the teepee?" He accepted my tobacco. He nodded in all serious, as only a wise person can when queried. "My boy," he said, "that is actually a teaching that comes from our white brothers. That's one of their teachings." I was astonished. He said, "What does it mean?" I asked. He closed his eyes and nodded again. "My boy, our white brothers taught us If you have anything hanging more than 6 feet off the back of a vehicle, you have to tie a red flag on it. See, this is Indigenous Kistahpinanihk, the humor for which we as Indigenous people are known. It is nuanced and structured in such a way that it is difficult to explain to someone outside the circle, but obviously people kind of get it. Not all teachings are positive. I remember when my worldview began to change for me away from the belief in a creator. It was a gathering of elders and knowledge keepers along the shores of Manitou Lake, Saskatchewan. I was asked to keep a fire for a sweat for a group of cultural advisors and elders who work in the correctional system. In Cree, the helper of an elder at ceremonies is called Wolsak. This was the first time I kept the fire for this particular group of individuals. As the sweat was moving to its final round, I gathered the remaining stones together in a pile in the fire and had them resting on the tines of the pitchfork, ready to go in as soon as they were called, as I had been shown to do by the elders for whom I'd kept the fire before. The door of the sweat opened, and one of the men poked his head out, saw this, and yelled at me loudly to get those stones off the fork. He jumped out of the sweat and snatched the fork away from me. He made me feel about an inch tall. I walked away from the lodge. He later approached me with tobacco and tried to explain why he yelled, but at no point did he apologize. He went on to mention that if the creator had wanted those stones to be on that fork, then the creator would have put them there. When he finished his spiel, I looked at him, handed his tobacco back, gestured towards the lodge and said, "You have ruined this for me forever. Because anytime I will ever go near a lodge, all I will hear is you." It has been almost 10 years I have not kept fire for a second since. It was a harsh reminder of the humanity of those who are often held in high esteem. I hope that I will one day be able to sit in the lodge, to keep fire once again, and not see that man or hear his words. But it may be a long time before this wound heals. When the medicine is good, it speaks to people. I've watched as in front of a gymnasium full of people, a shy young boy jumped out of the audience, sat down at the drum without an invitation, and began to drum with us. It spoke to him in a way that he needed to hear at that moment, much like it did for me so very long ago. It is medicine of the Most High. It is our heartbeat. And I am humbled and honored to share it. While a proper bustle and some moccasins would be nice, I don't think I want a nice outfit. My regalia represents the scavenger survivor spirit I carry as a warrior, as well as the resilience that has kept me going this entire time. It represents who I am and where I came from. I wear these stories upon my heart and upon my body for those who have, as Hunter S. Thompson once said, the right kind of eyes. Next piece I'm going to read is, I wrote this during lockdown. As we as citizens of this country, we're celebrating and watching 153 years of Canadian history be flaunted, vaulted, exalted. As Indigenous people, we don't see it that way. And particularly when you look at what we as Indigenous people have gone through. in those 153 or so years. I want to kind of put into perspective what I was feeling and what that day, that 1st of July means to me. July 1st, 2020. Your Canada is 153 years old. My ancestral connection to that land, shackled by your Canada, goes back far beyond your concept of time. The land upon which you celebrate is where my ancestors buried their ancestors. For you, it's the celebration of lines drawn on a map, a construct of cartography. For me, I connect with my blood when I touch the soil with my bare hands. My DNA doesn't lie in that soil, it is that soil. For there are generations of human beings who have passed over this land and have had their bodies decay and return to this land, their bodies forever part of the earth, their atomic particles disentangling themselves from the shapes of their arms and legs and torsos and becoming one with the deep brown soil, becoming nutrients within it. Do I observe the day? No, not in that way. It's not about celebrating. It's about mourning and remembering the old teachings that I do. We are surrounded in your Canada, your United States, and your Americas by great multitudes of lost teachings. Stone circles and sophisticated cave dwellings and massive images scratched onto the surface of the earth and visible only from space, but to name a few. You know these sites because they're often said to be created by visitors from other worlds. For my ancestors were considered far too primitive by European standards to have the ability to create such things, yet there they are. They're here. They exist, created by Indigenous hands. The scholars look at and speculate about these places, these marks on the walls, these clay pots and these sacred sites, wondering their purpose. What would you do if you found out? I was taught that when a teaching is lost, it is not our responsibility as knowledge carriers to simply mourn and lament the loss. It is our duty to take what we can learn from what is left and reinterpret it to what it means to us now, to be resilient, and if need be, forge a new lesson from a lost one. We are sadly so far removed from many of our traditional teachings. Too many of our pre-contact ways are lost forever. Thus, we as Indigenous people here in your Canada, your Americas, must do what we have always done. We must fall upon our resiliency and forge ahead. In order for the Red Road to survive, I personally believe that we can no longer look at lost teachings, rock art, stone circles, and simply say, this teaching is lost. I feel it is our responsibility to look at these sacred things and say, what does this mean to me now? I feel that it is our responsibility to create new teachings, for we are the future ancestors. I am sitting out in the bush as I write this, a pen and paper in my hand. The leaves of the poplar trees rattle in the canopy above me as they have done for more years than your Canada can imagine. And my thoughts are with so many members of my circle who have suffered such tragic losses over the past few days. I always bring tobacco out to the bush with me and provide offerings for a safe return home. If I'm hunting, I'm thinking and honoring the spirit of the animal, for giving its life to feed my family, and remembering those who have taught me so much about Nihilestisio, living the Cree way with the earth. I also leave tobacco for those whose hearts are broken. My social media is often overwhelmed with close friends or acquaintances who have lost family members, and I often acknowledge these losses with tobacco down for your loss. I've been asked why, when someone has lost a loved one, I respond with tobacco down. When I say this, it is not merely an empty gesture or a meaningless phrase like thoughts and prayers. When I say tobacco down, I actually go out into the bush and make an offering of tobacco to a particular tree made sacred by the intent I place upon it. This is a way of honoring that person's waskotipais, that 100 watts of electrical energy that exists in the nervous system of all human beings, which keeps our hearts beating and our lungs breathing. When we die, that electrical energy returns somewhere back into the eternal power grid of life on earth. And that electricity is sacred. I've stated many times that I do not worship in a religious way any form of a creator or omnipotent being. It is my way. I seek tangible scientific proof, and that is provided when it comes to waskotipais. It is scientifically measurable. This is the life force that I honor when I put tobacco down, and when I say it, I mean it. This is but one way to adapt old teachings in your Canada, and it is not a new concept. When I smudge, I use matches to light the sage. When I dance powwow, the music is amplified using a microphone. When I am gifted tobacco for my teachings, it is from a store. We've adapted fairly well in your Canada. It's what we do best. Thank you.
So. That's not. Oh. So I read the book. I only mark things when I like them, so you can tell I like the book. And like a teacher would do, I wrote down questions as I was going through. And so and ask those questions. But before all of that, I just want to say we're both from Muskeg Lake Cree Nation. And Muskeg is a small community, you know, not more than 12 families that kind of originally formed that band. And so when I asked, of course, I asked my dad, and I said, "So are we related?" And he said, "Oh yeah." And then he named exactly how we're related, but it's like generations back. Anyway, so Johnson cousin. Okay. Which is a real honor for me to be here and to be able to support my cousin in this way. So starting to read this book, you get into the book and right away you're brought to the land. And for me, that feels really natural because when we introduce ourselves as Cree people, we say our name and we say where our connection to our territory is. So the first essay in the book is about the land, and it locates your origins. And so was that intentional?
It was intentional. When you're dealing with anything regarding Indigenous topics, you have to. It's almost a prerequisite that is Indigenous people. We have to honor them. We have to honor where we come from. We wouldn't be here if not for those ancestors who walked that same land, who lived, loved, fought, had babies, died upon that land. When we are here because of the sacrifices they made, and so you have to honor. I've always felt you have to honor where you come from, and that is, it's something that we've kind of adopted with land acknowledgements. Others are recognizing that, but it's something we've always done. And it's also particularly with what's going on in the world right now, you honor where you're coming from because it's a good, how can I put this, a good bovine fecal matter detector. And because when somebody says, where are you from? Oh, it's, well, you know, so and so. And it's a way of kind of checking your story out. And so, but with that honoring that land and as stewards of land, it's kind of our responsibility. Yeah, we recognize very important, and we have a sense of pride in where you come from. And I mentioned in the book where I was born and raised is a very rough part of town. It's a very rough part of Prince Albert. It's known as the ghetto. It's known as the hood. But I wouldn't tell my dying breath to always be proud that I came from that part because it made me who I am today.
Okay, so another thing, you write a lot about knowledge spanning across generations of time. So past, present, and future are all included in the essays. So how do these considerations of time play a role in your writing and your thought process?
I always like to say time is a colonial construct. It's usually when somebody says you're late, it's late. That's a colonial way of thinking you're this time. It's the way stories were told to me. When you would talk to somebody who would sit and talk with an elder or talk with older family members, the way they would tell a story, they bounce from one topic to another, and you'd be talking about something that happened in the 60s. What happened yesterday, what you're going to do for Christmas, and so you're that way of telling stories, that past, present, future, where you've been, where you are, where you're going. That is something that was imparted on me very, very early on my journey back to the regular, being able to sit and listen to those elders, listen to those aunties tell those stories out here. I'm very fortunate that I have some very aunties. In Indigenous culture, the auntie is a very sacred role. The auntie will gives you the kind of tough love that a mother can. They don't have, a mother can sugarcoat stuff, an auntie doesn't, chooses not to. But at the same time, if anybody touches you, your auntie's going to be the first one taking her earrings off and so, and so to be able to sit there and listen to my aunties tell stories the way they do, talking about where so and so was doing this. Oh yeah, remember this time we did this. So that way of telling that stories in that way comes from that.
Yeah, I found that as I was reading it, I was really comfortable with it because of the looping. It's very familiar. It's exactly how my family tells stories when we're all sitting around the table, and then people are adding things in at the same time. So yeah, I was really comfortable with that whole looping. We come back, and then you go into something that's relevant, and then we'll come back, and it's just felt really familiar. So each essay is like a snapshot of your life when you learned like a lesson. So how did you decide on which ones were going to be included?
I wanted to, in this book, speak to things that weren't just for me. Going through all the experiences I've had, there are certain lessons that they're teaching, they're just meant for you and you go on. But I knew that to just focus on those that were specifically be selfish, because when those lessons were taught to me, those teachings were given to me. I talk about that concept of a knowledge, not a knowledge keeper, but a knowledge carrier. I've been very fortunate to been gifted tobacco many times, and that's no ceremony. Do prayer and do so much for people. And people try to call me a knowledge keeper. And as Indigenous people, you never refer to yourself as I'm an elder, I'm a knowledge carrier. You don't do that's a title that's gifted to you. And I've never been comfortable with that idea of a keeper, because I'm not keeping these for myself. I'm just holding on to them for a little while. They were gifted to me and I'm holding on to them for a little while before I pass them. And so when I went through the stories, I wanted to make sure that when I was writing, I wanted any lessons that were in there would speak to everybody. And not just little anecdotes for myself and myself alone. Because when I was very early on in my journey, I was told by those elders, when you speak, you're advocating for those who aren't here to speak for themselves anymore, or feel their voices aren't loud enough yet. And so that's why when I chose this very carefully, because I wanted to make sure that what I'm saying, if it's going to help someone, it's going to help as many people as possible. If it's going to educate someone, I want to educate as many people as possible. Because you can tell, I've always wanted to avoid being that boring old bugger in a pub. They call about, the guy sitting there, they talk about in old English. He tells the same flippant story 80 times. And finally he's like, oh, shut up already. I want to avoid the stories I always tell. And my daughter can attest that I tell the same stories over and over again. I want to avoid those ones. And I want to share the teachings that I got that would have the most effect, the most help for somebody, the most advocating for the issues I want to discuss.
And in the book, you talk about your role as Otachimo. Otachimo means storyteller. So Otachimo are the original teachers. So what has the process been like curating your first collection of nonfiction, knowing your role as that?
Before I answer that question, I do want to acknowledge somebody who's in the crowd. I mentioned in the book. In grade 6, I was at a tiny little school in the middle of nowhere. Like literally in the middle of nowhere. It was a rural school that was that fields on 4 sides. Like the stereotypical, it's in just north of Prince Albert, and there's literally nothing. You can literally see your dog running away. And the teacher read the book Underground to Canada. And this is something as educators, you realize that the impact we have on our students. This man right here, Michael Gatton, was that grade 6 teacher. And he read the book Underground to Canada. And he did it in such a way with voice, with inflection. It wasn't just mama. It was the first time I heard a story told that got me. And those teachings I got from this man, this teacher, I still use every day. I'm very grateful to him. I want to publicly honor and acknowledge him. I'm very happy to see him here today. For me, my professionalism is, in terms of writing, is I'm a spoken word artist. I'm a poet. When you're writing poetry, you can hide behind bangles and spangles and in terms of phrases. You can you're trained to put a lot into a little. To write in this format was difficult. And I always say that as Indigenous people, this idea of a written word, this is a colonial thing. It's a foreign thing to us as Indigenous people. Even Cree syllabics, the idea of Cree letters were created by white men. So this notion of putting words down on the paper is already a foreign concept. We're storytellers, we're oral storytellers. We talk, we share stories this way. So to take what are sometimes very personal stories and to put them in there and not have the training wheels, as it were, of being able to hide behind my poetry, it was very difficult. But at the same time, it was very rewarding. It was very boundary pushing for me. I was completely out of my comfort zone doing it. Which is funny because I could sit and talk about these subjects as we're doing right now. If we were just in conversation, I could talk, but to put them down on paper was a tricky thing for me.
I like poetry myself. To be very selective about what I let people know. All right. Oh, okay. So almost every single page in this book some type of connection to location. So can you just speak a little bit about that importance, because it came out as something that's really important to that connects to each of those lessons, like there's a relationship with the place. And it was almost everything.
That connecting with a place is to help make that teaching, give that teaching a little bit more reality, and try to take the esoteric nature of it out. That is one of the things where if you read a lot of philosophy, I love me some philosophy, but at the same time, it kind of feels like these are not my words. I'm paraphrasing. It's kind of like you're talking to a stoner. You're just kind of, where are you going with this, man? There's no, it's a kind of, you get taken down the rabbit hole, and you're more confused at the end.
Yeah.
What I want to do is I want to tie these into a place, because for me, when I got these lessons, having that street sense, you connect with where you are. You learn to read a room, you learn to read a place. It's a survival instinct. It's your spidey sense that keeps you safe. It's kept me safe this whole time. And part of that is, in order to draw on those teachings again, and draw on those memories and be true to those memories, remembering the place where I was taught, and helping to impart that in the reader as well. And particularly if somebody does have has been to disorder, or somebody kind of grew up in the same situation. Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I can get this, and they could see where he was sitting, where he was talking about, where this was happening, and that's also part of that descriptive narrative, that oral storytelling. We are as 21st century moves on, we are slowly becoming disconnected from everything because of our devices, right? We're losing that emotional content, that ability to kind of, we just look it up, we're not looking around. It's shocking, but not surprising when I go to my happy place, Prince Albert National Park. And it's shocking to watch people walking the trails of Prince Albert National Park, looking at their phones, and stopping when they run out, when they're out of signal, and then they look up and look around. So I wanted to, when I tie into where a story takes place and what's happening, it provides that teaching. They're not quite parables. I didn't want to write parables, but I just wanted to put that anchoring point, that muster point for people who go to the story and be able to connect with it.
I think it adds to understanding, because these are autobiographical, it adds to understanding the person. Because we talk about where you started, and it's like you go on, like the reader goes along with you on this like journey into all these places, and it was really good when you could make it visual, like the place was visual, because there's some that I have never been to. It's like I'm standing right there with you, and so yeah, I like. It reminded me of some other Indigenous writers, but like even like when you walk in some sets of the scene using the land, location, and the character comes like almost like that. So it's really beautiful. There are some really personal stories in here, and were any of them hard to put into words, because you knew that people were going to be.
Most of it actually. I'll be honest.
How do you know where to stop so that you're still respecting yourself?
I would stop when as I was writing, I would read it, and if I start to feel uncomfortable, I would go back and change it. Because as artists are in any format of art, your ultimate goal is to cause an emotional connection with somebody else. If you're a painter, you want your painting to have an emotional contact with the viewer. If you're an actor, you want somebody to have an emotional connection with the role you're playing. For me, I take that role very seriously. I don't want to, open up a can of trauma worms on somebody and just kind of leave them hanging. And I also didn't want to do that with myself. Well, the biggest thing that you run into a lot is two people can see something, can see an event. They could be standing right beside each other, and they're going to have two different responses. And I mentioned that in my book that you could be standing there right beside me, but if it traumatized me, that doesn't get questioned. My trauma is my trauma. There are certain things where I will draw allusions to, and the reader can fill in the gaps, particularly when it comes to what was going on in residential school. I don't go into a lot of detail. For the simple fact is I'm still dealing with it myself. I'm still processing my experiences in residential school. And when you're an individual opening yourself, you make yourself vulnerable when you speak. When you share stuff, you're making yourself vulnerable. And at what price what's the price you're going to pay for that vulnerability? And you have to be true to yourself. And I want to be a writer, not a martyr. And so that's where I come from when I write my stories. Am I going to? I think about, and I talk about this when elders talk. They'll say something. Great big long pregnant pause before they say something else, because that elder is thinking about every word that's going to leave their mouth, and they have to take responsibility for that. And I've seen the dangers of when somebody doesn't take responsibility for what they say and the actions that the listener has. I would never want to put anybody else in that situation. I don't want to put myself in that situation. And I don't want to sacrifice somebody else's emotional health on the altar of creativity. And that's where I draw a line. If I was writing something and I started to feel uncomfortable, and am I writing, going back to that, why am I writing this? Am I writing this to share something, or am I writing this to glorify the trauma and go for shock value?
Good job. That's a picture of me. Okay, so throughout the essays, you introduce us to many of your ancestors, like the connections and who they are, and you can tell that you've really dug into understanding who they were as people. So can you talk about how their story is intertwined with your story?
I am very fortunate and privileged, and I acknowledge my privilege that I come from a family that is very well known, well respected, and has played an integral part in history, not only Indigenous history, but Canadian history in general. My great-great-grandfather, they named a bridge after him in the city. And he signed Treaty 6. My great-grandfather was the first chief to successfully win a court case against the Crown over land claims. My cousin was the first Indigenous soldier to land on Juno Beach. So I come from, my grandfather is held in the same regard as Riel and Dumont within the Navy circles. So when you come from that kind of lineage, you have to acknowledge your privilege and you're fortunate, because so many of our people, be it through residential schools, through the 60s scoop, through disease, through isolation, have lost that family narrative and are fighting so hard to get that back. And to come from that lineage, come from those strong women and men who kind of set the bar for the rest of us to follow. And you have to acknowledge that. And you have to, we are all standing upon the shoulders of giants. And it goes back to that honor. You honor the land, you honor your ancestors. And I want to acknowledge, I acknowledge them so much in the book. Also, as a way of, and we talk about this in Indigenous culture, when you first meet someone and they say they're from a community, you play the game of who's your mom? And who's your mom? You're looking for that connection, but at the same time, you're also, it's another detector of, is this person genuine? Is this person really who they say they are? And being light skinned, it's always been a struggle being a light skinned Indigenous person to have that connection, because if you got light skin, you're a walking symbol of colonialism. You're colonialism alive. You've got ancestors somewhere that at some point, I said it in a poem. You're proof that when your ancestors fell in love with a white person or had that love forced upon them. And so you carry that as part of your narrative. But also you have to, in order to help combat that denial of who you are, people denying like, you're like, you don't even look Indian. Oh, this is magic, always kept it in your back pocket. And as part of that, it was part of that survival, that defense mechanism. But what it did was it created in me, made me one hell of a genealogist. Because you want to, and you learn these stories. I learned all my ancestors. I found out through history, when I was gathering the history of my family, that my great grandfather Laurent Garneau, who fought beside Louis Riel in 1869 in Red River, also fought the Fenians when they tried to invade Canada. I discovered that my great grandfather, Mr. Ossis, actually came from Slave Lake, Alberta. Wasn't originally from, and that his nephew was farming. And so you discover these things, and sometimes you discover things that you don't realize you're going to discover them. I talked a little bit about the man who I thought was my paternal grandfather. Was a man named Jeremiah McDonald, and he lived to be well to his, I think he was a blind man. And I was trying to figure out where this McDonald surname came from on Muskeg Lake, and I thought I had it nailed until I found out that it turns out that wasn't even my dad's real dad. That he was actually, that my dad's real dad was his last name was Watson, and he was from Muskeg, or from Mr. So so you find out those things and you have to honor that. And that's why I want to make that connection and to keep their stories alive. And that's part of that. The ancient Egyptians have a saying, to speak the name of the dead makes them live again. And that's a beautiful phrase. I remember I heard that when I was a young man, and it's a beautiful phrase. And it's something I've always carried with me. And I also think of our young sister out of culture, the water carrier. To paraphrase what she said, one day we will be ancestors, we're the future ancestors. And so one can only hope that when our grandchildren and our great grandchildren come along, that they will study our stories as well. And hopefully when I talk about it in the book. Like this. Well, it's kind of funny, but my wife, when she was discovering her ancestry, it turns out that she found out that her great grandpa was actually like one of the moose jaw bootleggers. and with a horse thief that used to like because she was trying to establish her Métis ancestry. But she also found out that her family was one of the displaced families from Prince Albert National Park, and just part of the Fish Lake. So she found, you take the boot bed, you honor your ancestors, wherever they come from.
Okay, so the themes I found in this book that kind of repeated throughout were land, language, and resistance to colonialism. So can you describe that relationship between those three, or did you do it intentionally?
I think those connections were done long before I started writing. We are connected to the land. We are stewards of the land. It has been our role to be. We're role to be land defenders, water protectors, and in many cases, we're the canary in the coal mine. We as Indigenous people, as the first peoples of this territory, have an intimate knowledge of that. What is healthy? What the healthy land looks like? What a healthy water system looks like? What a healthy ecosystem looks like? And we were the first to see what the effects colonialism had upon that structure. And we are also the first to raise the alarm in many cases. So that connection has always been there. I think of our sisters and brothers in the Black Hills who have, you look at the communities in South Dakota, the Indigenous communities who are suffering so much with poverty, with addictions, with violence, with death, with disease, but yet have billions of dollars sitting in a bank account in Washington, D.C. because the government wants to buy the Black Hills, and the Lakota people will not sell the Black Hills because that is, you don't sell your mother. That's resilience, that they're still here. That, well, where anybody else billions of dollars, we'll take it and we'll run with it. They're resisting and they're still surviving in spite of it all. That warrior's path is it's a tough one. It's not an easy way out. And that connection to being able to stand up and defend and advocate for, like I read in the story, like I read in the chapter, and this isn't just a piece of land. This is our DNA. This is our ancestors are that soil, and you have to honor that connection, but also continue that struggle. And that was a battle that we've been fighting. It's a battle that any Indigenous person fights. Doesn't matter where you are on this earth. Anywhere those redcoats and muskets come over the hill or off the boat, you're fighting that battle. And it's a battle to protect. And it's a battle that we didn't choose to fight, but we choose to continue to fight.
Good things to think about. Okay, my last question. So now that you've written poetry, now that you've finished a nonfiction book, what can we expect from you?
Harlequin romance.
Do you think you'll do more?
I hope I'm given the opportunity to do it. I've been very fortunate. I've been very lucky in the past 3 years to have my words shared. My first book came out in 2004, and I thought, right on, I'm set. And then I went for 17 years without another word published. And I've been very fortunate in the past 2 years to have everything. These last 4 books, and I'm very honored, very humbled, and very respectful that happened. So if I'm given the opportunity to write more, I will. It's a storyteller. It's what you do. You can't help but write, and it's whenever the news takes you, you go with it. You can't fight it. Even if it's waking you up at 3 o'clock in the morning, much to my wife's chagrin, she here's the click of the light.
I'm just gonna get this down.
Yeah, I remember it. I often wish I could be like Ronnie Van Zant, the lead singer with Leonard Skinner. He never used to write anything down. He says it was worth remembering. Remember it. Unfortunately, I'm not like that.
That's goals.
But it is, and as long as there are people that are willing to read what I have to say here, so if I talk to 10 people, and if only one person out of those 10 get something from my words, then I've done my job. And hopefully that person will pass that on to the next person. And that's one thing with these stories is, like I said, they're not mine to hold on to. I'm just carrying them from everyone. And when I'm an ancestor, I don't think someone else will carry them on.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really happy that I got to read this book. I will recommend it. Yeah, thank you.
Like to say I'd just like to say a quick but sincere thank you to John and Mika for being here and everyone at Wolsak and Wynn Publishers. John will stick around to sign some books, and we've got copies of Carrying It Forward available for purchase in store and online for our virtual guests at mcnallyrobinson.com. Thank you for joining us and have a wonderful evening.
Anybody have any questions?
I have one easy question for you. Can you tell us about your other books?